Welcome to another one-on-one. I'm Joel Bacon, and I'm privileged today to sit down with Congressman Garret Graves from Louisiana's 6th Congressional District, which includes Baton Rouge and a wide swath of the state. Importantly for us, Congressman Graves, this Congress was named to ranking member of the House Aviation Subcommittee, and we look forward to talking to him today. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So I mentioned the Aviation Subcommittee is a new assignment for you, but you're in your third term. Before coming to Congress, you had an illustrious career serving in both the House and the Senate in key roles on not only for personal offices, but for committees of jurisdiction on transportation. When you came to Congress, they recognized that and put you to work right away on key subcommittees. And last Congress, you were the chair of the Water Resources and Environment Committee, subcommittee. So you have a long history of service and work on transportation issues. First question is, so aviation, what appealed to you about that subcommittee?
Well, first, ever since I was a very young child, I've been out involved in different types of infrastructure projects. My family's all involved in civil engineering and land surveying. I got my first job doing land surveying when I was 14 years old, preparing for infrastructure projects, and I've always loved them. The thing about aviation that's really exciting is that, the other forms of infrastructure where I've spent a lot of my time, whether it be water resources and working with the Corps of Engineers or highways and roads, you're often dealing with solutions that should have been implemented 30 years ago, 40 years ago, in some cases even longer. Aviation's different in that it's largely driven by innovation, and it's largely on the leading edge of technology. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to not be doing projects or implementing things that should have been done decades ago, but actually thinking forward. And one of the first hearings that we had was Aviation 2050, thinking not about what we should have done last year or years before, but actually thinking about what we need to be doing now to prepare for aviation technology in the future.
Yeah, so you and the chair, Rick Larson, had that committee hearing early on. You've also looked at infrastructure development, really busy first couple of months for you on the subcommittee. You talked about that forward look in that particular hearing. What struck you about what the subcommittee needs to really focus its time on? What are you interested in focusing on more specifically as you look down the road for this Congress?
Sure. Well, in regard to aviation, one of the things that I'm really excited to do, at our hearing, for example, we had a company talking about doing urban aerial ride sharing. Now think about that for just a minute. So right now we're all working to raise billions and billions of dollars to build new roads, and just to think about the future and opportunities in technology like that, and to be able to prepare for those types of technologies, those types of scenarios that improve quality of life, that improve emissions, that improve the environment, that help to save time and improve efficiency. Really want to spend time focusing the FAA on regulatory matters and implementing laws that are going to help to facilitate innovation, to facilitate improvements in safety, to facilitate improvements in efficiency in our environment. So that's where I really want to spend a lot of time, is helping to focus on the future.
So you mentioned the new technology that's sort of a couple of, well, who knows how far we are away from realizing those technological advances. More immediately, UAS and commercial space and some of the new technologies that we're already seeing on the forefront. You mentioned FAA's role and trying to take a regulatory approach that was built on 100 years of commercial aviation activity and really move that forward to deal with these new exciting technologies. What's your assessment on where FAA is now, and how do you drive the agency forward to think about accommodating all those new technological advances?
Sure. Well, first you got to think about the fact that we're creating effectively traffic jams in the sky, with whether it be drones and helicopters and fixed wing and all these different aerial technologies that are out there. We've got to make sure that we can properly manage those in a safe manner. So in terms of assessment, it's important to note that the United States is largely ahead of everyone in regard to the regulations and just sort of the framework to operate a lot of the different new aerial technologies that are out there. So I think the FAA is doing a pretty good job relative to other countries, but let's also keep in mind that I think that they're a little bit late in regard to where Congress and some of the aviation community wanted them to be in regard to releasing some of these regulations. We made big changes to the aviation law in the fall of last year, as you know. We've been meeting with the FAA and meeting with Secretary Elaine Chao of the Department of Transportation to push them to aggressively move forward on implementation of that legislation. They've indicated that they may slip on some deadlines, and we made it clear to them that's unacceptable, that they need to do everything they can to comply with those. So we're just going to keep pushing to move forward, to adapt to technology, but stay steadfastly focused on safety as the primary motivation as we move forward.
So on the safety front, less forward-looking, more immediate concern that I know you've been dealing a lot with is the Boeing situation, and there's ongoing investigations. I don't want to get deep into that with you, other than to ask you just for a sense of how much time that is consuming for you now, and how much time you think that's going to consume for the subcommittee as we move further into the year.
Well, safety is paramount, without a doubt. Now, the Boeing situation was interesting in that you did have 2 crashes, but at the same time, we've had tens of thousands of flights on that same model in the United States with millions of passengers, and we haven't had an event. And so we need to learn on the hardware side what happened and what we can do to make sure that we triple check the redundancy and the safety protocols and measures. We need to check on the training side to make sure we understand exactly what needs to be done, and perhaps differences between the Lion Air scenario, the Ethiopia Air scenario, and our pilots in the United States that fly these same planes. And also on the software side, where a lot of attention has been paid lately, better understanding the interface between the hardware, the software, and the pilots to ensure that we do not have incidences like this again. But I want to highlight, and look, I'm not prejudicing any outcome. We're going to continue to follow the facts, or allow the facts to lead us where we need to be going. But the issue is that I think is important to focus on is looking, for example, at the training of those pilots compared to in the United States. As you may have seen, there were some reports indicating that one of the pilots on the Ethiopian Air jet only had 200 to 300 hours, which, as you know, you wouldn't be allowed anywhere near the flight deck on a commercial airliner in the United States on a domestic flight under that scenario. And so just making sure that we continue to set the standard, the gold standard for aviation safety in the United States. As you well know, aviation, airline travel, flying on airplanes is still the safest form of transportation in the world, and we've got to maintain that standard and that confidence for the flying public.
I want to shift gears on you a little bit and talk about infrastructure investment.
Sure.
And I highlighted some of your experience. You've got the water resources side, you got the highway side, you're learning the aviation side, coming up to speed obviously very quickly on that. One of the things in the midst of all the political chaos we've seen here in the first couple of months of this Congress that both sides have been pointing to as an area of possible agreement and progress is a big infrastructure package. Just want to pick your brain and get your assessment, knowing, like I said, with your history of putting together packages, big packages, you know the inherent challenges of doing that. As we start to look forward to an infrastructure package, what's your view of how we move forward? Is it a possibility? Just how do you see things playing out?
Sure. Well, if you take a look, you take a few steps back and you look at what's been happening in this country, there's no question that we're seeing a growing economy, we're seeing unemployment drop. And so what does that mean? It means that you're putting stress on 2 places right now. Number one, we're putting stress on our infrastructure, and it's exposing the facts, as we discussed earlier, that we're 30, 40, 50, perhaps even longer behind our investment in some infrastructure areas. And so it's putting additional stress on that lack of investment, that lack of planning. It also is putting stress on our workforce. We don't have the proper workforce to actually fulfill a lot of the jobs that we have available. But on the infrastructure piece, which we're going to focus on in the Transportation Committee, we have got to do an infrastructure bill. We've got to, number one, make sure that the investments that we're making now are principled investments. Make sure, number two, that our project development and delivery process actually represents the urgency of the infrastructure investment needs in the United States. Los Angeles Mayor Garcetti gave just a classic line at the hearing. We were talking about infrastructure investment. He said, the difference between a Republican and a Democrat? All of us sitting there, well, I don't know, I think I do. And he goes, a Republican is a Democrat that's been through the NEPA process, you know, but you know what, he's kind of right. Let's make sure that we have the most efficient project development implementation process that we can, where we're saving as much money there, or putting it a better way, not wasting money in that process, while still respecting the community's right to know and participate, health, safety, environment, and other things. Those are all really important, and we can do a better job recalibrating and rebalancing that process. And then I do believe that we need additional infrastructure investment, but we've got to make sure that the investments we're making are principled investments. In regard to some of my personal background in infrastructure, one of the biggest jobs I ever did was helping to rebuild the levees and restoring the coast after Hurricane Katrina. Just an extraordinary job, tens of billions of dollars. And look, we all know you can make stupid investments. You can make bad investments in your personal life, and you certainly can do it with taxpayers' funds on infrastructure. So we've got to make sure that we have the sideboards in place to understand where we're making true investments, recognizing this is the public's money, and we're making investments that are going to provide a return on investment to the public, versus those projects that may be pork, P-O-R-K, or pet projects. And so we've got to make sure that we have the right criteria in place to make investments in projects that are truly going to help address the infrastructure stresses that we're seeing today.
I think you just hit on two of the key parts of the debate, it seems, as this package gets put together. How do we streamline the process? How do we make principled, smart investments? Are you optimistic that the committee can come together and put together a package? There's been speculation, or many have said that if something's not done by August, things are going to get very political in advance of 2020, so there's a tight window. Are you optimistic that the committee can put something together and move it forward through the House?
You know, Chairman DeFazio, he and I have worked together many times, bipartisan bills. He's been fair when I've worked with him. Obviously, Sam Graves, my father, kidding. Sam Graves, the ranking member of the committee, has a lot of experience working through some of these challenging infrastructure issues. Look, we all know this is going to come down largely to the revenue. The revenue streams, are we increasing taxes, are we not? That's what it's going to come down to, which is why I think it's so important that we spend a lot of time focusing on project efficiencies. You know, if right now people say, hey, let's pull a number out of the sky, we need $100 billion in infrastructure investment this year. Let's make sure that we first squeeze every penny of efficiency out of our existing system, because maybe we can get that $100 billion down to $50 billion. And get it down to a number that's more manageable, where we can actually have discussions. But look, raising taxes, even adjusting them for inflation, is a really tough issue for a lot of folks. I take very seriously the responsibility about spending other people's money. I'm tight at spending our own money. When it comes to other people's money, even a higher bar, a higher standard. So we've got to make sure that the investments we're making, if we're asking people to bring additional revenues to the table, that we can ensure them that their dollars are going to be spent in a way that's going to help them get from home to work faster and safer, that we can ensure them that it's going to result in us having a better, safer environment, that we can ensure them that it's going to improve their experience with airline and aviation travel. These are all really important objectives. We've got to make sure that we're entrusting their dollars in a principled way, and that we're truly investing them and not wasting them.
So before I let you go today, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't focus a little bit more in specifically on the airport funding piece. And we had a hearing recently where the issues before the airport community were front and center. And as you know, and as we've talked about offline, the airport community is very focused and cognizant of your arguments on the federal side, and I think there's a recognition that federal dollars aren't going to solve the airport infrastructure gap. So we've asked for additional local authority to raise the PFC, which hadn't been raised in 20 years, to give local authorities that flexibility to make a principled case locally on what they'd like to invest in. Just your thoughts on that hearing and the path forward for airport infrastructure in particular.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I gotta commend the folks at Baton Rouge New Orleans Airport that ensure I get tased every time I go through to remind me of this PFC issue. No, they're great folks. But this is a real challenge, and so let's sort through it a little bit. Number one, we did come in and provide some supplemental funds for aviation infrastructure last year, provided a big lump sum. Number two, you've got the Aviation Trust Fund it's flush with cash. Number three, you have airlines like JetBlue that have invested billions of dollars in airport infrastructure. So on the one side. On the other side, is it really the federal government's job to tell local governments what they can charge? You have a should be somewhat sovereign local government that's been appointed or elected by leaders in that community. Is it the federal government's job to tell them what they can do and not do and what they can charge and not charge? That gives me some pause. I'll say it again, I'm not a tax fan. I do believe in local autonomy. They're closer to the people, closer to the problem. Number two, the inflation issue that you talked about. I mean, how many of us are making the same salary we made 20 years ago? None of us are, because we've hopefully we've been able to work and keep up at least with inflation over the years. And so there's a fairness or value argument to be made there. And then the last one is just ensuring that we're not setting up a scenario whereby airports would come in and just start building things and sort of under a scenario of build it and let's hope they come field of dreams, and more so using principled criteria to determine where they can actually get a return on investment. So I really think that this issue, the PFC issue, along with the gas tax and all these other revenue raisers, I think it's really going to come down to how big of an infrastructure package are we talking about? Are we talking about an infrastructure package, or you're going to be talking about all sorts of taxes and fees and increase, or are you talking about an infrastructure package where we've actually gone through and we have scoured every one of the investments and programs we have today, ensuring that we're maximizing efficiency, and then we're recognizing, you know what, we still need more. And so let's figure out how we're going to adjust this delta or this additional need and see if we can find some principled solutions and come in and bring some additional revenue, additional investment in to address those remaining projects.
Well, I think you just expertly walked through the pros and cons of the issues. I will tell you, I liked the one scenario that you laid out a lot more than the other one. I appreciate you being open to having the discussion on those, and I know the Baton Rouge and the New Orleans folks and everybody have been in to make the case with you. You have a big job before you as we move forward. Just want to thank you for your energy and for your passion on these. We're super excited to have you in this new role, helping lead the Aviation Subcommittee. Look forward to a lot more discussions with you. Appreciate your time today, Congressman.
Hey, thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in for another one-on-one. I'm Joel Bacon.